Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to have all of you joining from all over the world. I was thinking I would go around and try to welcome everybody from the different parts of the world, but it's phenomenal because you're coming from everywhere. And so whatever part of the world you're coming from, whatever time of the day it is there, welcome to this session. Welcome to this UN75 dialogue, which is focused on building an inclusive society. Just before we proceed, we're giving it some time so as many people come on as possible. I'm going to begin with some ground rules, just some ground rules for everybody. The first thing we're going to do is that, as you can see, we're going to have some polling going on, and we would allow anywhere from 20 to 30 seconds when we're doing the polling for everyone to participate. This polling is your way of lending your voice to this conversation. So make sure when the polls come up on your screen, take it as fast as you can so that we capture your voice in this. We would also have questions from you, the audience, but please do not leave the questions in the chat box. I see a lot of activity in the chat box. On your screen, you would have a Q&A section. It is going to be to the bottom of your screen to the right. So you can leave a question there. And it's only from there that we will take questions and use. So I can guarantee you that we will not have enough time to answer all questions. Those that we can answer offline as well, we will. Those that we can answer in the question and answer section, we will. And there are a few that we're going to have. We're working on going live as well. I think we are, when we get to a certain number of people, we will also be going live. But for now, we have, we're approaching about 300 people on as more people come, we will make that determination of going live on Facebook as well. And then as all participants will have their mics muted. So don't worry, don't panic if you're not getting any sound from your side. As long as you're hearing us, that's how this is designed to work. The only people who would have their mics on at any one time is going to be our panelists. Those are the ground rules that we have for this session at this time. And now we're going to move on. We're going to move on to our session. So once more, welcome again. The first thing I'm going to do is I would like to. We're very, very lucky to have with us some great panelists and guest speakers. Let me begin by introducing myself. My name is Arrey Obenson. I'm CEO of a company called Transformunity. But we're blessed to have today with us the Under Secretary General of the United Nations, who is also Special Advisor to the Secretary General on the commemoration of the United Nations 75th anniversary, which is the reason why we're having this dialogue. So we're very, very fortunate to have as guest speaker who will be opening this, Fabrizio Hochschild-Drummond. We are also lucky to have here with us the director of the United Nations SDG Action Campaign that is actually hosting this event, and she will be closing the session today. It's Marina Ponti. And for the panelists, we really have this great dynamic and diverse group of people that are going to be sharing their thoughts with us today. From my very good friend from Sudan, lives in Toronto. My brother is a recording artist and entrepreneur, very, very talented. He's a multi-talented man I've gotten to know over the years. Emmanuel Jal, and you can look up Emmanuel Jal and his music. We also have from a global shaper. She's one of the Forbes under 30 that I've gotten to know in the last few days. And her mission is to build an inclusive future through the power of education. And she comes from Brazil. She's called Thalita, Gelenske. We also have from Botswana, an activist that I've gotten to also learn is very involved with disability rights as well. From Botswana, we have Katlego Kolanyne-Kesupile. And then we have from Nigeria, this gentleman works with child rights. There's a group that I've learned about in the last few days, the Amajiri young people of Nigeria, and he's really working to help them get the kind of education that every other child has. And that would be Mohammed, Sabo, Keana. So these are the panelists that we have. We're going to be getting their perspective as we go ahead. Now, just before we go on, I'm going to really try to set the context of where we are, why we're doing this. And then I'm going to hand over to the UN Undersecretary to talk. He's better placed to talk about this than I am. But this year, 2020, marks the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. Who would have thought that the world would be in the kind of place that it is today? We are going through very, very uncertain times. And I guess when the planning of this anniversary was taking place, nobody imagined that we will be here. Just a minute, where I'm having one or two technical issues. I want to fix that and make sure that everybody is hearing me. Okay, I hope everybody can hear me now, because I got feedback that I was not being heard. Okay, great. So I was saying that we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the United Nations this year at a very, very challenging time when the world is plagued with this coronavirus pandemic that is spreading across the world and causing untold suffering to our people. But incidentally, we're having this dialogue today on the Global Day of Solidarity. Whilst we may see and read and everything that's happening around us that's catching our attention is the bad news. But behind, in this crisis, we have really seen how people have stepped up, neighbors have stood up to support one another, communities have come together to support one another. People have found love, people have spent time with families. And as we look ahead of today, we must remember that the only way we're going to get through this is if we stand together, if we are stronger together, which happens to be the theme of this Global Day of Solidarity. So let me not take too much time setting this up. The United Nations Secretary General decided that instead of throwing a big party to celebrate this 75th anniversary, we should talk and listen to people of the world, people who make up the United Nations. So we are, this whole dialogue is all about this. Now, just before I go on to introduce the Undersecretary, I'm going to invite you, the audience, to participate in a poll, because I know in the chat box you've been talking about the surveys, but I want to know how many of you have taken the UN75 survey, because this is one of the ways in which the Secretary General wants to engage the people of the world. They want your voice in this conversation. So how many of you have taken the UN75 survey? So please go ahead and respond to the poll that would be on your screen at this time. All right. I hope you're all taking the survey. We will close in just a few seconds. And once the survey is done, we'll reveal the results. So of all the people online, 37% of you have taken the survey. Now, 63% of you have not taken the survey. So I have a good friend at the UN SDG Action Campaign who is going to drop in the chat box a link to the survey, and I'm going to ask those of you that have not taken the survey, the 63% of you that have not taken it, make sure you take the survey, because we want to hear your voice in this conversation. And at this point, well, Mr. Undersecretary General, as you can see, we have growing interest in the survey. 37% of those who are here have taken the survey, and I hope that we're going to grow from there. But since it is your responsibility, the commemorations of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, I'm going to hand the floor over to you, Fabrizio, so that you can address our audience.
Good. Well, a very good morning to you all. I'm very grateful to be here, and a particular greeting to you, Arrey, and also to my dear friend and colleague, Marina, and her fantastic team who are at the backbone of our effort. As you can see, unlike you, Arrey, I don't bear butterfly wings. And this is age-related. You know, I'm still in the chrysalis stage, and with advancing age, it takes a little longer to come out of the chrysalis. But I think my butterfly wings will grow certainly by the next day of solidarity. I'm very glad to be with such a distinguished panel of young people. You know, young people, as nobody's too young to learn, nobody's too young to lead, nobody's too old to learn. That was one of the favorite sayings of my former boss, Kofi Annan. And I think now perhaps learning is more important than just about at any other moment since we emerged from the terrible suffering of the Second World War. The UN is turning 75, as you pointed out, Arrey, at a moment of incredible crisis, one of the largest in its history. We know that as of today, well over 5 million people have been affected by COVID. There are at least 350,000 deaths across the world. The true number is probably higher. And we know that with the economic collapse, the employment collapse, the fallout is going to be much broader than those who have been made sick or have lost their lives to the disease. The repercussions are enormous. Over 90% of students across the world have had their schools closed. the effective out of school rate is about 60% of all students. We have to remember that the majority of students, especially the majority of girl students, don't have access to the luxury that many of us have for our kids of online schooling. We will see the Human Development Index drop for the first time since its creation in 1990. Health, education, and income indicators, employment indicators will all go down. So some people have described this pandemic as a great leveler. I'm not sure about the accuracy of that, because the impact of the virus has not been equal on all people, even if one way or another, most people have been affected. Some populations are at much higher risk than at others. In this country, which accounts for about a quarter of all known cases globally and about a quarter of all known deaths globally, minority populations, Hispanics, Americans of African descent are disproportionately affected. Some of the highest contagion rates are among the indigenous groups here, and that pattern is elsewhere. The elderly are notoriously more affected than young, although young and even children can be affected. And men are more affected than women generally. But having said that, it's women who, for the most part, are working hard on the front lines. And we have to remember, the front lines are not only the doctors and the health workers who we rightly celebrate here in New York every evening at 7, but it's also the people at the checkout counters of supermarkets or in pharmacies who are right on the front line. Of course, women are also affected by increases in domestic violence, and children who may have been less affected by the disease itself. We've seen surges in sexual exploitation and abuse of children online. So the impact of this is complex and multiple. And the response likewise needs to take into account those who are disproportionately affected. The rallying call of the Secretary General has been the rallying call behind this day, the day we celebrate, solidarity. And the Secretary General has been at the lead of bringing to the attention both of world leaders and also of the global public where help is most needed. And he has called for measures that focus on inclusion, on equity, on boosting health systems, on social protection, on job protection, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises and workers in the informal sectors. He's also highlighted the impact on continents where there's less focus, like Africa, and he's highlighted the fallout on human rights as well as on vulnerable population. He's also spoken of the mental health challenge. And I have to say, we have to bear in mind that while the disease itself can be deadly, it affects overall a relatively small minority of our population, even in those places where it's raging with great vigor. It affects in a physical sense. The mental health impact affects a much broader proportion of the population. The lockdown measures, the uncertainty, the threat to jobs, the loss of jobs, that has a massive mental health impact, which goes far beyond the impact on our physical conditions. And that is not getting the attention it deserves. And that is one of the points that the Secretary General has been advocating. The pandemic has also illustrated the importance of work across borders in all sectors. And not just geographic borders, although that work across geographic borders is, of course, at the heart of the raison d'etre of the United Nations. But it also shows the importance of working across borders between business and policymakers, between civil society, business, and policymakers. It is only by breaking down these silos and crossing those borders and working together that we will save lives. And it's very clear, and it's never been clearer, that in this response, the multilateralism, a multi-stakeholder multilateralism, is not an abstract academic concept, but this pandemic, in ways that none of us anticipated when we chose to mark the 75th anniversary in this way, this pandemic has illustrated that multilateralism, multi-stakeholder multilateralism is a way to save lives. And where there's a deficit in it, there's no question that lives will be lost. Where there is no learning and no cooperation between countries and between sectors, lives will be lost. Where that learning takes place, lives will be saved. So we've also learned that with this pandemic, and this pandemic is a horrible illustration of so many of the challenges we face. What I'm saying of the pandemic is equally true of the need for a joined up response to, say, climate change. But this crisis, we will not win anywhere unless we win it everywhere. And of course, that's equally true of climate change. You can't beat climate change in Europe or in Africa. It can only be won globally. So, you know, but it's really not very clear how we will emerge from this crisis. Will this crisis help the world come to its senses? This is a forced reflective moment. We are forced to pause for those who are not frontline workers, and reflect where we're heading. And that's exactly what UN75 is about. We want, through our exercise, for the world to take stock of where it's heading, where it wants to head, and what the expectations are of we the peoples, the first three words of the charter and the foundation of our organization. We are set up to serve we the people. So we want to hear from them where they think the world is heading. Is that the direction we wish to go in? And if not, what sort of course correction we might need from international cooperation and from the UN in particular? And that is what we're asking with our survey. And Arrey, thank you for highlighting it. And I'd like to thank the 37% of participants who have responded. And I'd like to plead with the 63% who have not yet, but maybe are doing it right now, to please join. And not only that, but to ask your family, your network, your friends to join in, because this is the time to speak up. It really is the time to speak up. It is, if you look at the newspapers, it's not clear how we will come out of this crisis. It's not clear that we will come to our senses and come out more united, more sensible, more joined up, with greater solidarity, greater cooperation across borders. We see every day signs of new fractures, new tensions, new trends towards isolationism and away from global cooperation. Both trends are out there. But if we want solidarity to prevail, this is really the time to weigh in, and the UN75 platform is one way to do that. We have adapted our work to the COVID situation. You'll see that in this 1-minute survey, which probably more realistically should now be called a 1.5-minute survey, we've added 2 questions relating directly to COVID. One asks, what do you think should be the chief priority in the aftermath of COVID? And we've already got about 25,000 responses from many countries to those questions, which we only introduced about a month ago or a few weeks ago. And it's very striking, some of the answers. The principal answer, unsurprisingly, is what people see as the biggest priority now is better universal access to universal healthcare. That is to be expected against the backdrop of this disease. But the second priority that people put after access to healthcare is solidarity. And I found that extremely striking. So the popular sentiment out there is the need for greater solidarity, is the need to help those who need us most. And not only as a matter of altruism, not only as a matter of human rights, not only as a matter of human decency and ethics, but as a matter of enlightened self-interest. Our communities, our societies, our world is so interdependent, so interconnected, that we cannot be realistic about the welfare of ourselves, of our families, of our communities, of our countries, unless we're also looking to the welfare of our neighbors, neighbors close by and neighbors further afield. And that is the reality of the 21st century. But there are many trends that are still in a very different way of thinking. And it is really important that we come together and make those voices for solidarity better known and louder. And the UN75 platform is one way to do that. So we would plead for your participation. We will plead for your cooperation, not only through your participation, but by helping us get the word out. Please help us hear from as many people, especially young people, especially people who the UN would not normally hear from. And we will take those results in September to world leaders. And we will use the results that we draw from this survey to advocate for the sort of change that means that the world will work better, the UN will work better for those who need us most. And we will do our utmost to use those results also to ensure that we leave behind a better future than the one we live in now. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for being here. And thank you for anything that you can do for UN75. And above all, please stay well, stay safe, stay sane. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Under Secretary General Fabrizio, for doing this, for awakening the conscience of people around the world to participate in this dialogue that is taking place all over the world. As you said, we the people is what the United Nations represents. And I hope that this dialogue serves as a platform for the people to take ownership of the United Nations and share their thoughts and help this institution serve the world better. With that said, we're going to turn over now to our panelists. I just want to, highlight, when the Undersecretary General spoke, he spoke about the need for us to have more multilateralism, more engagement around the world. But I also want to insist on the fact as well that today, being a day set aside as the Global Day of Solidarity, it is really important for us to think about the circumstances in which we find ourselves. We know that COVID-19 poses great risk. It is sowing seeds of division and further polarizing an already fragile and fractured world. But this theme, building an inclusive society, focuses on the future. It helps us think about where we want to go from here. And today, being the Day of Global Solidarity, highlights our interdependence on one another, and that we only will come out of this stronger if we stand together. So we're going to be stronger together. Now, before I go on to the panelists, I just want to say We know that the crisis has highlighted all of these inequalities. But the questions that we have is, how do we build a stronger society? How do we ensure that moving forward we are stronger? How do we ensure that no one gets left behind? How do we create opportunities for everyone to be lifted up? How do we empower the less fortunate, the vulnerable, indigenous people and minorities around the world? How do we overcome this them versus us mentality that is creating this friction in the world and fanning the flames of division in our society? How do we ensure, and this is really very important, how do we ensure that the dignity of every human being on planet Earth is respected, which is the very essence of why the United Nations is created? Now, to answer this, we're going to be guided by this survey conversations, and I just want to highlight the fact that there is a special survey that is designed for today, the Global Day of Solidarity. We're going to constantly drop that in the chat box so that you can also take that survey as well. The more people take it, the more we will come out better. But I want to go to our panelists to begin the conversation. And I'm going to start everybody up with the first question to our panelists. I'm going to start anyway with Thalita, but we're going to go through all the panelists. In interest of time, the panelists will not probably answer all the questions, but I want you to feel free to come in if you have a divergent view, so that we don't repeat the same positions over and over. But if your view is divergent, then you can come in on a question, but without which we're going to move on to all the questions so that we can cover them. But I want to start with Thalita. Thalita, what should the international community prioritize to recover better from this pandemic that has really put us in a situation that we never expected? And you can talk about your 3 priorities from the list of priorities that are going to come up. But I also want you to speak to those priorities from your perspective, who you are, Thalita.
Perfect. So first of all, thank you so much for the invitation and for the opportunity to be here. And I really recommend that everybody participates on this survey, because it was amazing for me to answer and going through all the questions. It made me reflect on many important things. So with that said, I am Thalita Gelenske. I'm from Brazil. I'm an entrepreneur. I founded Blended Do, and I'm also a global shaper. And it would be a lot easier if the option, all of the above, was an option to select. But considering we don't have this option, this is how I try to frame my answer. I think we need to rethink global economy, making sure that human rights are a central element, and having as the primary goal to address inequalities that we already have, but that was deepened as a result of COVID-19. So I'm just trying to elaborate a little bit more. I really believe that we need to reshape the way we measure success and growth in our companies, in our countries, going beyond GDP and going beyond profit margins. I'm not saying that we need to completely invalidate the system, but we do need to embody new perspectives, to recognize and reward achievements in terms of sustainability, SDGs, and human rights. And I think the most important goal is to remodel, for remodeling the global economy, is to create equal opportunities and reduce the inequalities, including those created by the pandemic.
Thank you very much for that. Your generation is going to reshape the world. as I can see. At this point, I'm going to go on to the next person that I want to call on will be Mohammed. Mohammed, would you respond to this question? I know you have a very unique perspective. I want each one of you to bring that uniqueness in your perspective. So Mohammed, if you can share with us your thoughts on this question.
Okay, thank you very much, Arrey, for having me. It's my pleasure to be part of this important panel discussion. So I'm Mohammed from Nigeria, and I work around vulnerable group of children called the Almajiri children in northern part of the country. And to give it a little bit background, they are children that have been socially excluded from the society, lacking in almost everything that children should have. And so taking it up from the question on what should the international community prioritize to recover from the pandemic, I think for me, it will be the issue of the effect of the pandemic on the inequality gap that have already been existed, you know. I mean, like the group of children I work with, they are out of school in the first place. Now we have people who are privileged having online classes, and you know, and then the same group of children, they have to beg before they eat. And now with the whole crisis, we have been asked to self-isolate as part of the measures to prevent the spread of the virus. Now you have these children who have to beg before they eat, being asked to self-isolate. So for me, my response to this question would be that we must address the inequality that have deepened as a result of the pandemic, because as we have seen that a lot of people, vulnerable groups, in the normal circumstance have difficulties in assessing some basic and fundamental human rights issues around education, around access to healthcare, around water and sanitation, you know. And with the pandemic, we have seen that deepen so much. And for us to come out of this pandemic more stronger and better, I think the issue of inequality that has arisen from this pandemic should be better prioritized. It will go a long way to heal the world.
Well, thank you very much, Mohammed, for that. We have you emphasize addressing the inequalities that have been deepened as a result of COVID. That's really important. I'm going to go now to Emmanuel Jal. So you, what would be your priorities of the list, and put that in the context of the incredible work that you do?
Well, I want to say thank you for making me part of this. You know, back in Africa, when you want to change something growing out as a kid, they'll tell us a story. So I want to just start with a simple story. You know, how they catch monkeys, because monkeys were very annoying when you are sitting under your tree, you're eating your nuts, or you drink your water, your juice, or your beer, and you go into the house. The monkey would just come and drink it. So what the wise people did, or the old people did, which became a global knowledge now, is you'll either get a pot or a gourd. And in that gourd, if you want to catch a live monkey and tame them and keep them at home, so they say, okay, this is what we're going to do to teach the other monkeys not to come. So they create a gourd, and in that gourd, they make it small in top, and then they put the nuts, and the person, it's like eating the nuts from the gourd, and then they leave. So now the monkey would come and put the hand inside it and then grabs the nuts. And then the owner will come screaming at the monkey. So now the monkey will hold the nuts so tight that it cannot get out. And it can be whipped and beaten and scream, but doesn't want to leave the nuts. And then you can tie the monkey. So that's how we are like human beings right now. We created a system that we love the things of the system. We love our mobile phone. We love the nice house. We love to drive the nice car. We want to fly fast. So we are polluting the environment. So we've created a system that we know is harmful. But Here it is, we know we are sinking, but we don't want to let go, just like the monkey. And so to me, what I'm looking at here, how can we let this go? What are the ways to allow us to let go? I believe each and every person there knows, as you can see, we're all connected. We have this impact. We're in the same ship right now, but we have different perspectives because we're in the same storm, but also we're experiencing it differently mentally. For example, now it's even much tougher for people who have been traumatized, because the trauma is actually 10 times stronger when there's something catastrophic that happened. So, and it gives multiple triggers. So you may find some people now sleeping, they're depressed, but also there's something that is related to trauma. And I call it stress. Stress for a short period of time is good. It allows us to do stuff quickly. We can achieve great goals, but when stress persists for a long period of time, it becomes poisonous and it makes human brain stupid, feeble, and primitive. So now we have a bunch of organizations who think they're smart, but they're becoming more stupid and stupid. A bunch of corporations that think they're smart, but they're becoming more stupid because it's not wise to be wealthy. As you can see now, there are people who made so much money. No one is interested in a Chanel bag right now or a Gucci or a Ferrari. Where are you going to drive? Who's going to look at you? Now we've seen the wild is speaking to us. Now, what about when the global warming just hit us? What are we going to do if we can't take this as a lesson?
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. I knew you were going to give us this artistic side of you and this storytelling side of you, and that's great. I would like to go on to to Katlego in Botswana now, and Katlego, we've spoken about the different perspectives of the speakers, and I would like to get your perspective, especially highlighting this disability side of things. When we started this session, we were testing out to have subtitles because we also wanted those who cannot hear to be able to participate in this conversation. I know we've had some technical challenges with that. We're working on that, but that's all we are all going to be trying to do better as this proceeds. So Katlego, to the question, what should the international community prioritize to recover better from this pandemic?
Thank you, Arrey. To start off, dumelang bagai to everyone around the world, and thank you so much for joining us. And I think we've learned a very fundamental lesson in this particular webinar, in that there seems to be this idea of inclusion being inviting other people to your party, as opposed to saying, we all want to have a party. What does that party look like for us? I love the fact that Emmanuel was highlighting the fact that there's certain things that we refuse to let go, and those things end up compounding the inequalities that we then say, oh, well, it should be better. We should do better to save people from suffering, when in fact we are the reason that people are suffering. When we look at leveling, recalibrating the world and getting back to a level play field, what do we have to, who suffers the most when those who want to remain in comfort end up dictating what the new normal is? I keep hearing all about this new normal, and it doesn't count in people who still never had access to the internet. When you say training online is going to be the more healthy, the healthier way of working, it's going to be the faster way of working, it's going to be the smarter way of working. If I can't even get people to come to my market and buy goods that way, now you want me to go online when we don't even have the infrastructure. So infrastructural differences, infrastructural inequalities end up compounding, which then affects, what I think is the ultimate thing that we need to focus on. And it's that point that says prioritizing universal access to healthcare. And as nonsensical as it might seem, or as obvious as it might seem, I think we tend to not look at healthcare as the two parts of the word. health and care. Now, we not only want people to have health, but we need to ensure that we care for the having of that health in such a way that being healthy is sustained. Disability, and when we look at infrastructural barriers which result in disability, so things that disable people, that disable beings from being able to be counted as worthy bodies, as worthy people, falls under healthcare, but healthcare beyond just, is your body able to come to the party? It's a matter of, once your body is at the party, what other parts of your selfhood are we engaging in this space? So really, for me, this pandemic has highlighted the fact that there are certain bodies that we have counted and discounted as valuable to the success of the world. And we are now needing to recognize that, again, we've got this webinar where we wanted to have subtitles, but those subtitles didn't work out. Does that mean we stop the webinar? In an inclusive world, we find a way of ensuring that this isn't an obstacle that we ever have to face. And it might take a lot of time, but if you say, oh, it's difficult, we'll try another time, it says some people really won't be as affected if they aren't at this party. And I've seen this being done by the Botswana government, where only yesterday was there a video released that was specifically targeted towards people who use sign language. But Botswana, as a country that doesn't have a national sign language, and using English as the language for the subtitles and for the content, says you're excluding people who, one, can't read English, and two, don't necessarily use those signs as the language that they speak. So again, inclusion really is about more than just getting another person to come to your party. It's leveling out and saying, we want to have this kind of party. What do we need to do to ensure that everyone can come to this party and also enjoy the party?
Fantastic, Katlego. That's really a great perspective. And putting the twist on prioritizing universal healthcare and making sure that we're caring about the health, how we deliver the health to the people. That's really important. I'm going to go on to our second question, and I'm not going to do this in any particular form. I'm just going to allow anybody that would like to contribute to this to begin the conversation. We may not go through everybody, but if we were to take a longer view, if we could picture the world in 25 years, what are some of the three things that you would most want to see out of the list, and why is that? So, Katlego, do you want to take that?
Oh, definitely. I think, so it's strange that we have this question about looking forward in 25 years. I saw a meme that said, obviously in 2015, when we all answered the question, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? We all got it wrong. And that, you know, in retrospect, you can laugh at it, but this is the thing of when you do work in the moment. It's 75 years since the United Nations was formed. And if you read the the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it shouldn't be a thing where 75 years down the line, we are still wondering why we don't have greater equality between the genders. And this, again, as Emmanuel said, is a matter of there's a system that we've built that we refuse to acknowledge that it doesn't work. Greater equality between women and men comes from more than just men saying, oh, we need to make more space for women, and not letting women in. So it requires radical change. It requires putting oneself in a position of discomfort with the understanding that temporary discomfort for one results in greater prosperity for everyone. And so I would love to see greater equality between the genders, but I want to see it between the genders across all genders. So not this normative idea of men deserve this, women deserve this. What about people who aren't in men, who aren't in women? What about people who are trans diverse, such as myself, who, when we need to have access to our human rights, those are things that are guarded by the states we belong to. But if a state doesn't recognize you as a person, how can you even contribute to the betterment of that state? So
Absolutely.
Greater respect for human rights. Equality is not it's not some plant that you water and hope that it can survive. You feed that plant. And if we keep giving this plant poisonous, everything poisonous, whether it's poisonous water, whether it's poisonous manure or fertilizer, we will watch this plant constantly struggle to grow.
Yeah, thank you very much, emphasizing equality and human rights and working at it. This is work in progress, and I wish we can accelerate things together. But that's the purpose of this conversation. Emmanuel, where do you think what would you want to see the most in 25 years, if all things being equal, right?
I see Katlego, I think, nailed everything. I like the way putting the point across. What I would like to see is every family, every community have their own solution. They have their own dreams. They have their own vision. I would like to see people collaborating with ideas of those who think they have their solutions. For example, now you could go to a place like South Sudan, and people has been surviving for you, and you find somebody, aid workers, they come and tell the people, hey, you need water. But the people say, we don't need water, we just need tools. We can dig the land. So now we're not listening to the people who have their solutions. So for example, you may find UN come up with solutions for a problem, but they haven't found out what is the local, what is the subconscious saying? Because like when you go and communicate with people, when somebody is communicating in a conscious state, they may hide everything, but what are the signs that are being shown behind? So, I mean, I would just add that point, and the other two I'll just probably, if I start talking, it'll take me a while. So.
Yes, okay. Thank you for that. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to question 3, and I'll turn towards Thalita for this. You know, we have a list of all of these global trends, but knowing that you're young and the work that you do and you're trying to affect the future, Thalita, well, which of these global trends do you think will most affect our future?
Okay, so
let's say your future, because you're that young generation that's really looking to a different future.
Of course. It was a hard choice as well, but I selected climate change and environmental issues, risks arising from new technologies, and breakdown in relations between countries. And well, first, I think many people already understand that climate change is not a future threat, but it's already happening today. So the more we neglect it, the more we get close to the point where there's no turning back. So I believe this is something critical. And second of all, I have also selected the risks arising from new technologies. And we already know that automation will eliminate millions of jobs. It will also create some jobs, but not everybody will have the education and agility to adapt. So this scenario can bizarre inequality, and not just between people and classes, but between. This technological revolution can also create conflicts. And I really like the quote from the professor Yuval Harari, and I even have it on a post-it so I don't do it wrong. And he says, when you have enough data, you don't have to send soldiers to control a country. So we have this imminent risk, in front of us, and we have a lot of risk for conflicts. And though all of those things that I mentioned, those are global problems that demand global solutions. So this is why I also selected the breakdown in relations between countries as the third trend. We need global cooperation so countries can share information, we can learn from each other, we can trust each other, and we can also help each other in this, in the way that we're living and the way we are addressing the future.
Thank you very much. Considering your background, that perspective, especially on how technology can affect our futures, it's really something that we need to look at, and how do we capitalize on that to actually make the future better. Mohammed, what are your thoughts on this, on these trends? How do you think will affect our future?
Thank you very much. My thought around this particular trend, it has to be the issue of rapid changes in population growth. And I will take it up from a UNICEF report that was released in 2015. It was tagged Generation 2030 Africa. And the report clearly highlights some demographic transition that will occur in Africa between now and 2030 and beyond. And it's kind of states and classify African countries around African, West African, South African countries on the fact that they will going to experience a very, very high population growth between now and 2030. And I mean, the statistics that they projected was that between now and 2030, between 2015 actually and 2030, Africa will be home to about 500 million children. And about half of that population will come from West Africa, where my country is Nigeria, and another neighboring country to Nigeria. And such population projection, according to that report, projects both opportunity and risks. Opportunity in the fact that when such huge populations are being properly managed, African countries such as Nigeria and Niger and other West African countries could reap a demographic dividend that could lift millions of families out of poverty and enhance social peace and security within the country. But the report also highlights the fact that economic achievement and growth cannot happen without the leaders prioritizing key policy issues around better access to healthcare and then education for the young ones. Because we are looking at in the next 25 years, where today's children will become the labor force in the next few years. And so achieving that demographic dividend that exists between this period as a result of rapid population growth, access to healthcare, access to better education that will equip them to take up the job is what is of great importance. And if a failure to prioritize that can lead to a greater danger and consequence for the nation, because lack of this will mean you will have a very huge population that lack education, and that will result to issue of armed conflicts that I will allow to mention as my second point. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mohammed, about that perspective on population growth and the explosion that is coming in Africa, but also the potential for that to be a challenge in our future, but also a great opportunity for the future. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to make we're going to make some slight adjustments to our schedule, because this dialogue is actually hosted by the SDG Action Campaign. We're lucky to have the director with us today. And I know that she has to leave early because they have activities for the Global Solidarity Day. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a poll. I told you that today's the Global Day of Solidarity. So I want the audience to participate in this conversation. And here's the question that we have in the poll. Do you feel people are demonstrating solidarity in your community during this global crisis? I hope that everybody participates in this poll. And after the poll, we're going to have the director of the United Nations SDG Action Campaign, Marina Ponti, make her remarks. And then we will continue with the second round of questioning with our panelists. So please take a moment to keep this open up for the next 15 seconds, and then we'll go on to the results, and then we will bring up the director of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals Action Campaign. Well, at this time, we have the results of a survey. And the question is, do you feel people are demonstrating solidarity in your community during this time of global crisis? And 33%, 55 of us said very much so. 57% said somewhat. I'm actually glad to see that only 10% feel that that's not happening. It means that at least the majority of those Hutu people are seeing some kind of solidarity. That's why we are celebrating today. That's why we're using today to highlight solidarity. And so at this point, I'm going to invite the director of the United Nations Sustainable Development Action Campaign, because I know that she has to leave in 5 minutes, so we would have her come on and make her remarks at this time. Marina, it's yours.
Yes, can you see me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, I cannot see myself, so I hope I'm center. And thank you, Arrey. Thank you for the panelists. It has been really extremely inspiring, particularly the last poll that you've just done with the participant, and I will come back to the results at the end of my small intervention. I was supposed to do the closing, but because today is a Global Solidarity Day and there's so many events, I really need to go. But I want to highlight some of the very powerful takeaway that I had joining this conversation. I want to start with something Fabrizio said, which was very, very important, and particularly we have many young people in the audience and also in the panel. Nobody is too young to lead and nobody is too old to learn. I think this is something which is really important, and I want to really take away this message. And then there is a second message which I think many people have brought about, and this message may explain why many people feel, yes, solidarity, but somehow that this pandemic has affected the most vulnerable groups. So somehow, beyond the rhetoric that, of course, the virus doesn't choose your status, your gender, and your race and your nationality, but the fact that you're out there, you're forced to go to work, and you're forced to use the public transportation, you're forced to be living in a community with high density, then of course put you at higher risk. So somehow I really feel that all the points that you've all made about the deepening of, on one side, the virus targeting those who are most vulnerable, and at the same time, of course, as a result, that the pandemic is deepening inequalities, talking about education, health, income, and jobs, and also in terms of inclusion. So I think this was very, very important. I also want to bring about, today is a day to celebrate the heroes. And of course, many people talked about the health workers, but we also need, and I think Fabrizio mentioned, we also need to celebrate those who work at the supermarket at higher risk and allow us to have access to food, those who are driving buses and subway and trains that allow the essential workers to commute, and all those who are less visible in terms of the health, but have allowed the infrastructure, the basic infrastructure of the society to go on and somehow to try to cope with the many demands. Then I really want to highlight another point, And I think Fabrizio also mentioned about this multi-stakeholder multilateralism. Also, the Secretary General and you, Thalita, also mentioned we need, I couldn't agree more, global problem, global solution. We need more of a UN, but we need more actor being active. It's not just government, and we've seen it with the crisis. It's local government, it's parliamentarian, is a civil society leader, is youth. It's really the all of society, joining forces to find solution. And really, I think it's. I also want to highlight, Katlego, when you said what you said about inclusion. It's so inspiring. I love your mention. Inclusion is about inviting people to your party, but who's inviting where? I mean, who gets to decide how is the party, which are the rule of the game, and the invitees list. So I think these crises should give us the space to really rethink of priority, and also the way we want to shape. And this will require, I mean, if we are all working to a better world, a better future for future generation, we will need to do some serious shake-up. And I think that the people around this panel today, and also looking at the chat, the people watching us are ready for that shake-up. So just to end, because I know you have more to say in your panel, today is to celebrate solidarity, but is also to send a message of hope, and also to say, today we celebrate solidarity, but we know that to really address the pandemic and build a better recovery, we will need to address the root causes of these inequalities and of the issue climate change and poverty and all the issues that are part of the survey and are part of the discussion. So I end with the hashtag of the day, which is stronger together, because we are stronger together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina. We are stronger together. And thank you for hosting this event and giving us the opportunity to have this conversation. That is the butterfly effect, right? Where everybody is playing their part, and the little things that we do today and going forward is really what will make the difference. So thank you so much for
Thank you. And let's start the butterfly effect to build a better society for all.
Thank you very much. I know you've been leaving us, but we will continue the conversation with the panelists. So far, it's been a very rich conversation. We just spoke about trends. We spoke about things that we want to see change in the future. And now I want us to talk a little bit about how important or not is it for countries to work together to manage these trends, these threats, these opportunities. It almost seems like globalization and collaboration is under assault at this time. So I want to go round to the panelists, and let me just say to the participants, we were designed to end in about 2 minutes. We're going to have an extension that goes on to half 15 more minutes, and then that's when we're going to be closing, just so that everybody knows. I want to manage expectations as to timing. So we're going to try to wrap up the rest of the conversation. I want to go on to, let me begin this time with my brother Emmanuel Jal. How important is it? I know one of the things that I've learned, and I say to the world, is that we've been tribal in our response to COVID-19, where we've really responded within the context of the man-made boundaries that exist between us. But that overcoming this pandemic really means that we look beyond these man-made boundaries. So how important is that to you, Emmanuel, that we that the world works together. I think you're still on mute. Let me make sure that you. We have to. Okay, you went on. You came on.
Yes.
Okay, you're good.
Yeah. So just wanna apologize when you see me with my phone like this. I'm just getting excited and taking video and telling my people, you guys are missing out on this amazing talk. Basically, when people are on a defensive state, especially when you have stress and there's a lot going on in your head, you're more about survival, about yourself. But I feel like if each one of us connect itself with their purpose and your true calling, it will automatically pull ourselves together, because you can see people are sharing what they have. There are people who are acting now. You have, you know, there are people who choose right now to eat 2 meals a day, say they could give 1 meal a day to the other person. There are people who are calling, so there's some people call me, Emmanuel, do you know any artists that are struggling right now? Because the music industry is done. Okay, do you know any entrepreneurs that I can give something? Because they know this is their main source of income. But you could see, I like what Katlego was saying earlier on about how some African countries respond in a terrible situation. Like you see in South Sudan, recently, people are told, go and self-isolate and stay. But you know, government militias was supported by the government, went to a village and massacred 1,000 people. When you tell people, go into your houses. Now, there are all of these things that are happening where you find some people are just getting beaten. Like we see education, food, where do you go and shop? So there's so many things that are happening right now. How do we respond to that? I think the most important thing is we are purpose-driven human beings. And if each one of us walk in their purpose, then we're able to find that peace of mind, that joy, and that we don't need to tell somebody to do. Like you could look like there's something about human beings. It's called empathy. You know, absolutely. Like if you look at me, I was an ex-child soldier from South Sudan, a British aid worker, not close to me, rescued me, smuggled me through a plane because our mind tells us this is not right, a child should go to school. And here I am now. If I track my journey in terms of how empathy work is, there was the rival tribe, they are called the Dinka, and my tribe has been raiding them. But there was a time I was starving, we were 1,000 kids, and a Dinka woman turned up and said, look, I have a food for one child. And she picked me, even though she knows where I come from, and fed me every day. So I'm just looking at where I think at this moment our real heroes are the purpose-driven individuals. Those are the ones that are standing up right now. We can see them, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're nurses, they're those invisible people. So if we can just continue to appreciate, if you see one of them, let's just appreciate them, because that little energy will push them further. That's the togetherness.
Absolutely, that's a great story. And that's the stories like this that are actually going to help move us forward. I'm going to go on to the next question. I'm going to ask, this may be a question, it's just a yes or a no conversation that I want to have with everybody. So Thalita, has COVID-19 changed your views on cooperation between countries? You can, or maybe it has not. Do you now favor less cooperation, or do you favor more cooperation? What would be your response to this question, Thalita?
Yeah, it has not changed my views because I think that we need to remember that no country can solve COVID-19 alone or by itself, as well as we cannot prevent nuclear war by itself, or climate change, or even equality. So I think this is something that I really thought was very important, and I still believe it is equally important. So my answer would be no, it has not changed my views.
What about your Mohammed? What are your thoughts on this?
My thought on this will be that yes, it's kind of changed my view. I mean, more favorable of the fact that I saw a lot of global cooperation, nations trying to reach out to one another. And myself particularly, I was so touched to see some countries, sending in doctors from their country to the countries that have been so hit. I mean, I was taught about global cooperation, but I think with the COVID-19 crisis, I saw that being demonstrated in real terms, So I do think seriously that yes, it favors more of a global cooperation. And just like Dr. Tedros keeps saying, solidarity between nations and all that. So, and indeed, I saw that solidarity, and I think it's a way forward as we go, as we move on as humans of the global village.
Yeah, thank you. Is there anybody who now favors less cooperation on the panelists?
So Arrey,
I'm hoping not, right? But yes.
So what I wanted to say, is I found this question quite intriguing because the option of no, it didn't change my position on collaboration sort of made it seem as though anyone who would say no wasn't already a believer in collaboration. Because I felt that there needed to also be an option that said, well, actually, I believed in it before, and it
so we're losing sound.
Are we still there with me?
Yes, you're back.
Thanks. So, Thalita knows this as a global shaper, a fellow global shaper. We constantly get asked, what are we doing to effect the change that we want to see in the world? And for me, being a member of the Global Shapers community has always been this reminder that poverty in Botswana and poverty in Argentina, poverty in Brazil, poverty in Switzerland, all really impact people in the same way. The poverty might play itself out in different ways, but when you come down to hunger, when you come down to lack of access to economic empowerment, when you come down to lack of access to one's human rights and being able to embody your own life and personhood, that doesn't change regardless of what language you speak, because lack of access is a lack of access across the board. So when we look at I think the greatest thing that needs to happen is, and when we move forward, when we try and do this collaboration, we've seen the global narrative on COVID become much more about economies, become much more about security, because people have been set into great insecurity. But we've also seen the very dangerous thing of the African narrative around COVID returning to, because Africa's got terrible healthcare systems, will Africans be able to make it beyond a life after COVID? Because of governance issues, what will happen to Africa? And we need to be very cautious of that as Africans, to tell the stories of success, and for us to stand together to say, this isn't our narrative, because there's again this idea that if we keep Africa down, then life after COVID for Africa will be the same as life before COVID for Africa, and Africa will always need us to save it. So there does need to be, as much as we can collaborate, we must also collaborate and hear each other.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. We're getting close to the end of this. I want to just do a quick round with our participants. And this is overall, do you think if we can project to that future, that 2045 overall, and this is just, do you think people will be better off, worse off, or the same as today if we were to project a 25? What is the feeling? Yeah, and I want to hear whether it's better, the worse, worse or the same from any one of you. And Katlego, you can just give me that one word if you.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope. The optimist in me says the world should be, people in the future should be better off than where we are right now.
Good. Thank you.
But I think we're going to be, oh yes. I was saying, but ideally, optimistically, we should be better off, but I do think we will still have problems. So I hope they'll be better positioned to deal with problems.
Oh, absolutely. That's a good twist. There would always be challenges, but how we work at it. What about Emmanuel? Do you think we'll be better off or worse off?
His mic is mute.
Okay. What about Mohammed? Just go ahead whilst we're...
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, Emmanuel, you're on. Yes.
So I look at it, it would depend on people's mental state. If they haven't evolved in their mental state, change can come to you, but you will not see it if you're still a prisoner of your own thoughts.
Oh, profound. That's very profound. Thalita?
There you go. I would say better. I try to be hopeful because I know a lot of people with amazing projects.
Wonderful. And Mohammed?
Yes, I'll go with Thalita. I think it'll be better because of emerging technologies and better understanding of certain problems. So I think they will be more better.
Now, yeah. So I would say we're hopeful. We're all very hopeful about the future, which means that we have to work to make that future that we hope for come to reality. Now, let me put all of you in the seat of the Secretary General of the United Nations and ask, if you were in that seat, or if you had to advise the Secretary General of the United Nations to address these global trends, and this will be your closing remarks. We'll try to keep this within a minute. What would be your advice to the United Nations Secretary General at this time? I would like to go back to how we started. So I'll go back to Thalita and then I will walk back from there. So Thalita, please, what would be your closing remarks by way of an advice to the UN Secretary General to deal with these global trends?
Perfect. This is not an easy question, but I would say that in January of 2019, I had the listen to Greta Thunberg in Davos saying a powerful quote, which is, "I want you to act like the house is on fire. I want you to panic." So we don't have all the time in the world, and we need to challenge the status quo, and we need to do it now. But we won't go too far if we are not inclusive. So please, we need to bring diverse people to the table. We need to give voice to the voiceless. We need to bring the youth, bring Black people, bring people with disabilities, bring the LGBT community, bring refugees, and so on. We need to seek out the stories of those left out of the public record. And we need out the people who have the leading roles in untold stories. So that will be my humble advice.
Thank you very much, Thalita. Thank you for that powerful advice to the UN Secretary General. We should always remember that that we have to create the opportunities for everyone to be part of this new future that we want to build. I'm going to go on to Mohammed.
All right, thank you very much. My own closing remark will, I'll take it up from my submission, my final comments during the 2019 Global Festival in Bonn, Germany, where I said we cannot achieve the SDG if we continue to leave the vulnerable people behind. So my position, my one final talk to the UN Secretary General would be that to emphasize on the need to close the existing gap of inequality that we have in our society. I mean, the sustainable development, the catchphrase for the sustainable development goals is leave no one behind. And if we have millions of people, millions of children who don't have access to education, shelter, who have to beg every day before they eat, who don't have opportunity to have education for a better future, I mean, that will clearly undermine the SDG. So for me, it will be that the issue of addressing inequality that exists within us in our society.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. In effect, we have to leave no one behind, as it says. That's very strong advice to the UN Secretary General. I'm going to go on to my good friend in Botswana, Kat, if you would like to give your advice to the UN Secretary General as your closing remarks.
Thank you, Arrey. You know, anybody who's read my story knows my story knows that I said Kofi Annan made me possible. So if it wasn't for the work of Kofi Annan, I probably wouldn't be in a position to even be giving this address right now. And I've seen so much more work being done to really bring in people outside of the fold into the fold, by those who have recognized that they might be occupying positions of power because they've played the system, because the system was willing to accept them. And my advice really is beyond looking at people as bodies and counting bodies to say this is what success looks like, this is what failure looks like. We really need to go back to qualifying who we count as people, whether it's LGBTQ people around the world in states where they're criminalized, whether it's women of all forms who in states where their personhood is not even recognized and they're subjugated and oppressed, whether it's people with disability who are told that they need to be fixed in order to participate and to be active members of the society. We need to, whoever this greater we is, because there is a we, and we keep subjecting people to oppressions and then saying society does this. If you do not count yourself as a member of society, then you need to then question who that society is, and so confront them. Today, in this day of solidarity, my question is still, when we say solidarity, who is this solidarity for? What is this solidarity for? And against what is this solidarity for? Because we can't just be bonding without anything that we're bonding against. So if that thing we are bonding against is suffering, is oppression, is subjugation, is anything that devalues one's worth as a valuable member of this greater thing we call the world community, then we need to stand in solidarity against that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for challenging us in our thinking process. And I'm going to go on to Emmanuel Jal. Emmanuel, what would be your advice to the United Nations Secretary General to cope with this new world in which we're living today?
I mean, if I was to suggest, probably I'll be fired the first day, because the thing is, I'll ask him like to go to the Security Council so we can demonstrate equality at the top level, because you have the 5 permanent members. How do we adjust it? How do we bring Brazil and South America? How do we bring representative in Africa? How do we bring representative from the Arabian countries? Now you just have like the top most powerful forces on the top of the decision making. So you never know what goes on behind the scene, what is getting decided. So if we can demonstrate that at the top, I would advise, what can you do to change the mindset? When they say never, never again, does it mean never for everybody or never only for the 5 permanent members? And so the next step would be fair trade. How do you mobilize the entire countries? Because if you look at it, entrepreneurs have solutions. They make money, they make the economy move, and you could see in the West, the business. When the business collapse, you hear the system collapse, you know, because they provide the services. How do we bring that fair trade, you know, where people can trade fairly with Africans? You know, how do we make that happen? And so if that can be done, then the entrepreneurs in Africa or in China or wherever, and if it's not fair, but how can we make it possible? You know, maybe economically come up with a deal. Yo, guys, the truth is, if we're going to buy a banana with you at $1, we're going to die. So can we buy it from you at 30 cents at least, then instead of 2 cents, you know? So at least get economies to come on board. Okay, basically, if the businesses are booming, then we don't need aid. Most people have solutions for themselves. Third thing is, how do you set up a system? The truth is, systems are built to exploit those who don't know, you know? Now, in Africa or whatever, we're always begging, give us aid, give us aid. This thing will never stop. It will just make us dumb and dumb and dumb and dumb. When can the truth be dropped? If I was a secretary, hey, look, the thing is, if you guys don't figure out how to come out of poverty as we did, we won't. So what do you guys require to figure it out, to find the formula? Because everything is about experiment. You can take an American formula to South Sudan. Hey, this is the recipe. It won't work. We will have different minds. So we just have to figure how do we do the proper experiment that will take us off poverty.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, and thank you to all the panelists for this rich conversation that we've been having here today. It's been incredible that we've had this conversation, that we had the opportunity. Once more, I want to thank you all for taking time as panelists, but also thanking the participants from all over the world that have been here today, that have been part of this conversation. We're going to continue this conversation. We have 2 more of these dialogues coming up on June 5th and June 19th. And I hope that we're going to have more of you come in and join in this as we try to transform this new world that we all want to see. Again, once more, thank you. Today is the Day of Global Solidarity. I'm just going to, you know, we're out of time, but I want to make sure that we also have at least one question from our audience, and which I'm just going to randomly ask anybody to answer this. This past weekend, we marked the International Day Against Homophobia, biphobia, transphobia. Sadly, this is still there's still a lot of hate and prejudice against those who are LGBT people. How can we, on a global level, tackle this and help build a truly inclusive society? I'm going to, you know, we have several of these questions, so it's really important that we understand that we're behind on schedule, and I don't want to keep this going. So here's what I'm going to promise the participants, is that we're going to take all of these questions. We're going to make sure that we provide answers that we're going to be sharing. And I work with the SDG Action Campaign to make sure that we're responding to all of these questions on the Facebook page. In the interest of time, I'm really thinking that we shouldn't proceed with these questions now, but trust me, we'll make sure that we will share the answers on the SDG Action Campaign Facebook page. I'll also make sure we have that on Transform Unity page, responding to all of your questions. But at this time, like I said, we would have another dialogue on Friday, the 5th of June, which is going to be focusing on the environment, healthy lives, healthy societies, and healthy planet. We're also going to be talking about economic transformation on Friday, June 19th. With that, once more, thank you to our panelists. Today is the Day of Global Solidarity. Take a moment and extend a hand of solidarity to someone that really needs it. Thank you very much for joining the dialogue.
Thank you. I enjoyed everybody. Is it possible you can put us in touch?
Yeah.
Yes, we will do that. We will do that. Promise.
Fantastic.
I'll do.
Right.
I'll connect everybody.
Thalita, Emmanuel, Katlego, good to see you all.
Yeah, I was like, you guys just boosted my brain so far.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.